So there's this guy named Mark Buchanan. He's quite a famous author and pastor and counselor. And he writes this: I have actually started doing this. When people come to me, dreary, weary, worn out, cynical, people whose chronic suffering or treadmill life has narrowed their world down to the aches of their joints, the bills piling up, the stone on their back, I don't try to solve the problem much anymore. I try to get them to notice something else, something right in front of them which they haven't seen or heard or touched or smelled in a long, long time. The sound of water moving across the stone, the shape of clouds, the pattern of grass makes on the back of your legs when you've sat on it for a while, like hieroglyphics, or like the scrabble of bird's claw in soft clay. The amazing changes, the withering and stiffening and whitening and deepening that happens in people as they grow old. I try to help them be childlike again. So for the next 3 weeks, I want to talk a little bit about rest. Holiday season is coming up. Some people aren't here today because they decided to go camping. Our summer is very short here in northern Alberta, and so we really want to take advantage of the good weather. And some of you are probably watching us online right now because you went away for the weekend. And that's okay. But I want to talk a little bit about what God has to say about rest. See, God actually cares about that. So, I want to start right at the very beginning. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through to chapter 2, verse 4. Now, this passage is about how God created the world. And I'm not here to argue with you if you have a different view of how creation happened. There's all kinds of different scientific ideas about how the world was created. That's not my point here today. The truth is, I do believe that God created the world, but I don't believe it because of scientific reasons. I believe it for one simple reason. There was a man who predicted his own death and his own resurrection, and then he pulled it off. His name was Jesus. Anybody who can predict their own death and resurrection and then pull it off, they've got my vote. I will follow. He believed in this story. If he believes it, I'll believe it too. He actually believed and claimed that he was there, part of the story, and so I'm good with that. So let's read the story. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." Then God said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food, and I've given you every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and all the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life." And that is what happened. Then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the 6th day. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the 7th day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because it was this day when he rested from all his work of creation. This is the account of the creation of the heavens and the earth. So, God creates mankind. And we didn't read the whole process. It was a 6-day process. He creates mankind on the very last day of creation, 6th day. And then we read here that on the 7th day, God said, okay, let's rest. So let's just stop and think about that for a minute. The very first thing that God told man to do after he created him was stop and rest. So he hadn't even started working yet. And he says, now stop and rest. I like that kind of God. He says, I want you to get into a healthy rhythm of work and rest. And so let's start right from the beginning with a day of rest. And God calls that day the Sabbath, and he makes it holy. Now, there's lots of different ideas about what holy means. Bottom line is, holy really means separated or set apart from the other days. And so, he set the 7th day, or the day of rest, apart as a separate day from all the rest. A different kind of day. And ever since then, mankind has been in need of having rhythms of work and rest in order to function well. Now, as humans, we have tried to mess with this rhythm. All throughout creation, people have tried to, do different things to try to cheat that rhythm, if you will. And we're still doing that. I've never had to work shift work, but many of you do. Shift work messes with your body because it messes with those regular rhythms of rest. Now, the Bible doesn't say that you have to rest on a specific day. What it does say is that it's important to have regular rhythms of rest. So you work and you rest, you work and you rest in order to thrive. Now, I would suggest to you that there's 3 rhythms that are important in the whole work-rest rhythm. First is, I think we need to have rest every day. Some point in the 24-hour cycle, you need to have some rest. I think that stands to reason. So there's a work-rest daily cycle. Then there's a weekly cycle, which is what we're talking about in this passage, where weekly you should have a day that is restful compared to the other days of work. And God doesn't dictate what you can and cannot do on that day. Now, the Jews tried to make rules about that, but Jesus condemned them for doing that. Jesus was like, no. This isn't about rules. It's not about making this into a big religious hullabaloo. This is about giving you a gift of rest. But then there's also a yearly rhythm. And I think that not only do we need to have a weekly cycle of rest, we need to have an annual cycle of rest, where there's certain times during the year that we rest and rejuvenate. And that gives us a healthy time, or a healthy cycle to function in. Now, like I mentioned, people have tried to cheat the system. And when you're young, you can get away with cheating on this and be okay. You can push yourself. And the truth is, when I was younger, I used to take pride in the fact that I worked hard and I could, keep going strong. I could be involved in all kinds of things 7 days a week. And, and our culture has become a 24/7 kind of culture where we go all the time. And we think we're so great because we are somehow cheating the system. The truth is that always catches up to you, and when you get older, like I am, really old, thank you for laughing, you start to realize, oh my goodness, I thought I was so smart, and now it's catching up to me. And the truth is, it depends a little bit on your genetics. For some people, it catches up to you sooner. For other people, it's later. But it always catches up in some way, shape, or form. So, God created mankind. He set this rhythm in place. And then there's this story that unfolds. And the first 2/3 of the Bible is called the Old Testament. The Old Testament revolves around the Jews, the nation of Israel. Then the second, or the second part of the Bible, the third, if you will, that revolves around the church, the New Testament, that's called. And that's the, with all of the non-Jews being included, which is what we are, generally speaking. So the first 2/3 of the Bible is a story of how God worked with the Jews. And I'm just going to summarize the story briefly. Basically, Adam and Eve were created, and they had kids, and so on and so on and so forth. And then they started to kind of drift away from God. And then there was this one guy who started to seek God. His name was Abraham. And God started to develop a relationship with him, which is what God always wants to do with humans. And then his son Isaac followed his footsteps. And then his son Jacob, who later was renamed Israel, which is why the Jewish nation to this day is called Israel. And he followed in those footsteps. But then he had 12 sons. And I'm not going to show you 12 fingers because I don't have 12 fingers. But he had 12 sons, one of them whose name was Joseph. He was his favorite son. The others were jealous, and they were cruel, bottom line, and they sold their brother, Joseph, into slavery. And the slave traders took him down to Egypt. In Egypt, he was a slave for a good portion of his life. Then the rest of the family ended up following him down there, and the whole family ended up becoming slaves. That family grew and multiplied until there was a whole nation of slaves in Egypt. Then God brought from within that nation a guy named Moses. Maybe some of you have seen the children's movie called The Prince of Egypt. That's about Moses. And Moses was one of those slave children that God miraculously had adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter. And so he's not a slave. And then he ends up leading this whole nation of Jewish people out of slavery and back to their original country that God had promised them. And the interesting thing is that as slaves in Egypt, they didn't have a healthy rhythm of rest. Their slave drivers didn't allow for that. They had to work 24/7, much like a lot of people today. And so when they were delivered from that slave lifestyle in Egypt, God had to start this program of reprogramming their rhythms so that they would learn how to have a healthy rhythm of rest and work again. And believe it or not, it took 40 years for God to reprogram those people to think in healthy ways and then live in healthy ways with these rhythms of rest again. And old habits, let's face it, are hard to break, even to this day. The interesting thing about this process of reprogramming that God did with the children of Israel was that it was a symbol of what Jesus, hundreds of years later, was going to do for all people at a spiritual level. So when we are out of connection with God, have this spiritual slavery going on the inside of us. Some of you may have experienced that in a very tangible way, where you feel all bound and driven internally to do certain things you don't want to do. Maybe it's an addiction or a habit pattern or some kind of thing like that. And there's internal stress and anxiety that just grips you and it drives you like a slave driver. And Jesus basically came to set us free from that internal anxiety. The truth is, when we go on holidays in the summertime or whenever we go on holidays, many people, and I'm included, it's not that hard to relax physically. We can lay on a beach or, do whatever. But for me, what's a lot more challenging is getting my mind to slow down. I've got all these things buzzing around in my head, things that I'm worried about, things that I'm trying to figure out, things that are going on around me, and it creates anxiety on the inside, and it's hard to settle that down. And the truth is, it can ruin your holiday. You can be going to this great place, and I've experienced this several times. You go to this beautiful place. Often we've gone to Kelowna for our holidays in the summertime. It's a fantastic place. Beautiful weather, beautiful beaches. And I've been there on many occasions on a beautiful beach. It's a nice sunny day, and I can't enjoy myself because I've just got all these things buzzing around in my head. And the truth is that Jesus wants to help fix that problem. That's what he was referring to. That's the symbolism of Joshua to Jesus. Now, there are artificial ways that you can help with that. Some people use substances to help settle their brain down. I've never gone down that route, and I'm grateful for that, because those substances who are trying to help bring freedom can actually bring greater bondage in the long run. They actually appear to be setting you free initially, but in the long run they actually turn out to be a slave driver that's even worse than the initial issue. And so some people use all kinds of substances, especially on holidays, to settle things down. But I'm here to suggest, what if we were to turn to Jesus instead? What if we were to ask him to help with this? So I want to go to a passage in the New Testament now. This is Hebrews chapter 4. So here we start by kind of tying back to that story. So Moses was the guy that brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. Then he handed the leadership baton off to Joshua, who actually brought them into their homeland. So here we read, "Now if Joshua had succeeded in giving them this rest, God would not have spoken about another day of rest still to come. So there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. For the word of God is alive and powerful. It is sharper than the two-edged sword, cutting between soul and spirit, between joint and marrow. It exposes our innermost thoughts and desires. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one to whom we are accountable. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God Therefore, we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So, we see here the parallel between what God did on a physical level in the Old Testament with Moses and Joshua to what Jesus did at a spiritual level years later for all of us. Now there's lots of stuff packed into this little passage, but you notice one of the phrases there was, it penetrates to the very thoughts and intents of our heart. So Jesus wants to bring rest at that level, at the very core of what's going on in our minds. And then he goes on to say, everything is naked before him. Now, let's just be honest here. The idea of being emotionally exposed or naked is absolutely terrifying for most men. For women, it's the idea of being naked or exposed physically, but for men, it's mostly being emotionally exposed or naked. And so, this idea of God being able to see all that's going on inside of us, for some of us, is just like, whoa, yikes. And yet that is exactly the key for us being able to find rest. See, when we feel exposed, we try to cover. We try to make ourselves look different by covering our exposure, our nakedness. And a lot of people do that. You know, we use different things. You know, we use our money, or we use our influence, or we use our friends, or we use this or that or the other thing to cover up those emotionally vulnerable areas in our lives. And Jesus, it says, no, 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 no. Don't do that. Don't try to numb those areas that are vulnerable. Let me heal them. See, when Jesus came and brought this rest to the Jews, they largely rejected that. They preferred to fix themselves. Now, the only way that we as humans can fix ourselves, quote unquote, is actually to just numb those areas that feel emotionally vulnerable. And the Jews, they had religion as their numbing agent. So they had all these religious activities that they would do and perform vigorously and religiously to numb their vulnerable emotions. And the truth is, there's not a lot of people like that today in our culture. Religion is sort of a passé thing nowadays in our culture. More and more people are walking away from organized religion. And the truth is, Jesus was really against organized religion too, because he saw what it was doing to the Jews. He saw that this was really not helping. It was actually hurting them. And so he came to fix the real problem so that they could do away with all the religious rituals that they had created along the way. That's why Jesus is so different from all other religious things, even religious Christianity. Jesus doesn't care for that. Jesus wants a relationship personally with every single one of us. He is not interested in just having us go through religious exercises or rituals. He wants to have a vibrant, living relationship where he can come in at that deeper level and actually heal those vulnerable emotional areas in our lives. And the truth is, religion is just like any other addiction in many ways. It's just there to numb. And let's be honest, that's one of the reasons why so many crazy things happen in the name of religion. All kinds of terrorist stuff and so on happens in the name of religion because religion is not the answer. Jesus is the answer. And then it's interesting in this passage that he says, we have a high priest who understands because he's been there. See, Jesus lived a physical life here on earth so that he would get firsthand knowledge of what it feels like to be in our shoes. And so he gets it. He understands how difficult it is to live a healthy lifestyle. He understands how difficult it is to be healthy deep inside. But he wants to help us truly be happy. Let's face it, we all want to be happy. Deep down inside, I mean, you ask parents what they want for their children. What do they say? Well, I just want them to be happy. We want that for our kids because we love our kids. We want that for ourselves, let's face it. Happiness is a great thing, and Jesus wants that for everybody. But the truth is, happiness, to live a happy life, is a lot easier said than done. There's all kinds of stuff coming at us that tries to snatch our happiness, all kinds of stuff that wounds us on the inside that makes it hard to be happy. Now, let's just be honest here for a second about this whole happiness thing, because the truth is, it's easy to be happy for short stints. Like, you and I can do fun stuff and be happy for a while. That's not so hard. The challenge is living a happy lifestyle, internally happy, for the long term. And most of us, if we're really honest, are living our lives with short stints of happiness, and then we hit the repeat cycle until that kind of wears thin, and then we try something different to make us happy, and we live this short-term happiness over and over again to try to stay happy throughout the rest of our lives. And Jesus basically came to say, there's a better way. You don't have to live on the short cycle of happiness for a few hours or days or whatever, and then try to find something else to make you happy, and so on, so on, so on. You can actually have a profound level of happiness at an ongoing level throughout your life. Now, it doesn't mean that it'll be easy, but you can do that when you walk with Jesus. That's what he is all about. And basically what Jesus is saying in this passage, and let's face it, the message of Jesus to the whole world was basically, relax. Let me show you how to live life. Let me show you how to do this. I will teach you how to live well. That's the message of Jesus to us, to the world. So we need to be in this place of letting go of our short-term ways of doing happiness and trusting Him in our ongoing relationship to allow Him to reprogram us to think in healthy ways, which leads to happiness. So, Jesus wants us to have a genuinely fun life, not just a series of short-term happy experiences. He wants us to genuinely feel that sense of joy. So Jesus is not a quick fix solution. Jesus is a fundamental, long-term transformation that changes everything. So I was thinking about how can I best illustrate this. And I don't know if this is the best illustration, but it was the best one I could think of at the time. So, I don't know if you've seen this before, but this happens on a regular basis right out here in our parking lot. Two fellows will pull up in their pickup trucks to have a conversation. And so they pull up driver's side window to driver's side window. So they're facing in opposite directions, and they roll down their windows, and they sit in our parking lot out here and have conversations. Looks like a good way to have a conversation, especially in the wintertime. You don't have to get out and get into the cold. You can have the heat turned on and so on and so forth. So imagine with me that there's a girl and she likes both of those guys sitting in the pickup trucks, and she's having a hard time deciding which one she wants to ride with. And so she decides, I'm going to have one foot on either truck. So they're sitting opposite directions, and she's standing with one foot on either hood or cab or whatever, you know. Anyway, she wants to have the best of both worlds, right? Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out this isn't going to end well for her. As soon as those guys take off, one in either direction, she is going to be in big trouble. Well, that, in a very simplistic way, is the decision that you and I face when it comes to happiness, genuine rest. One truck is facing short-term fun experience. The other one is facing long-term healing and fun through Jesus. And you can't put both feet or one foot in both worlds and make it work. Now, I'm not saying you can't have short-term fun, but what I am saying is you can't have short-term fun be the thing you rely on for genuine happiness in your life. Those two trucks are going in opposite directions, folks. And if you're trying to live your life from one short-term fix to another short-term fix to another short-term fix, you're going to end up not fixed. You're going to end up with more problems in the long run. But if you decide, I'm picking the truck that Jesus is driving, I'm going to go with His solution, with His plan. It might not be as fun in the short term initially, because He's going to want to look at some of those sensitive areas in your life. But once He starts to genuinely heal some of those things, you are going to find that the genuine rest in your soul will more than compensate for all the short-term fun things that you tried to live your life around that didn't really change anything long-term. So what am I asking you to do today? So there's a couple of things, actually a few things that I'd like to challenge you to do today. If you've never started a relationship with Jesus before, you've never made that decision, yes, I'm going to step into His truck, I'm going to ride with Him. Today could be the day you start. I think that would be an amazing way to do Father's Day 2019. If you're in that boat today and you're saying, yeah, you know what, it's time for me to do it Jesus' way, then I'm going to ask the prayer team to go and stand right over here. I'm going to ask them to do that right now, actually. Right over by that cross. And if you would like somebody to pray with you about stepping onto Jesus' truck and doing it His way, when the worship team sings in a second, I invite you to make your way over there and they will walk you through the process. And maybe there's somebody that you know of that you would like to pray for that is needing to make that decision. You could make your way over there and pray for them as well, in proxy, sort of. And if you're in that boat, but you're going, you know what, I'm not quite ready to talk to somebody face to face about this, but I would like to start down that road, you could just send me a text. We could have a conversation over text to start with. I think my number's up there now. Yep. So you can just send me a text and we could start a conversation that would lead down the road towards following Jesus. Now, the other thing I'd like to suggest is if you're feeling angst inside, stress, or a sense of busyness going on in your brain, bring that to Jesus. It's called prayer, and really prayer is about bringing our concerns to God. And Jesus actually cares about that stuff. He wants to hear about it. And every day I have a conversation with Jesus about the things that I'm feeling anxiety about. And it is profoundly helpful. Now, I know it takes a little while to kind of get used to that, talking to somebody that you can't see, but it actually works. So I invite you to, you know what? Just like you're talking to somebody that you know, sit down and have a conversation with Jesus and say, you know what? I'm feeling really stressed about this. Can you show me what's going on the inside of me? And you'll be amazed at the ways that God has of communicating with you the answers to your questions. And the last thing that I think I've already mentioned this is don't run back to quick fixes, to the things that you've relied on to numb those emotional angst feelings. Choose to let those go. It's in the midst of the angst that Jesus will meet you. If you numb your angst, you'll miss Jesus. You can't have it both ways. Now, I know that sounds hard, and it will be hard initially, but I challenge you, if you can hang in there, God will meet you. It will be amazing the way you'll see incremental changes that will lead to greater health and joy. You can find answers in the Bible. You can find answers through that sense of listening to your heart. And people around you will say stuff, and all of a sudden they'll twig something inside of you and go, oh yeah, I never saw that. I never thought of it that way. So I challenge you to open your heart to allow God to change the way you're living your life. So we're going to close off here this morning. I'm going to invite Michelle and Colleen to just lead us quietly in a time of sort of opening our hearts to God. And if you've got stuff going on the inside, I invite you to just be open. Say, God, this is what's going on. What do I do? What do you have to say about this? So before we rush off, let's just take a time and have that open communication with God. Okay? And then they'll dismiss us in a few minutes.